Hi guys, welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about the Artemis II mission. I'm Shanti.
I'm Serena.
And I'm Ellen. Basically, the Artemis II mission was a crewed lunar flyby mission, which took place on April 1st through the 11th in 2026 this year, which is why this is a super relevant and unique topic. And it was the first crewed flight of the NASA-led Artemis program and the first crewed flight beyond low orbit since Apollo 17 in 1972, where they successfully landed on the moon, which is the second time since, again, 1972 by Louis Armstrong. And basically, the crew, who was Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen, broke the record for the farthest distance humans have ever traveled from Earth, which is approximately 252,756 miles. So this is a super cool and interesting topic, again. But how, from people who are very interested in medicine, how does any of this correlate with medicine and the healthcare they had to go through? Well, they're especially being in space, which is a very unique experience. There are a lot of things that the Artemis II crew had to go through being in space. One of them being going through the space flu, which is basically just motion sickness. So after the launch of Artemis II, the crew had to go through space adaptation syndrome, which is when you don't have gravity. So the inner ear, which is the vestibular system, gets confused and causes severe nausea and dizziness in the brain, trying to recalibrate without gravity. And another thing would be fluid shifts, which causes a lot of puffy face, and causes the puffy face effect. So without gravity pulling blood to the legs, which is what normally happens on Earth, fluids rush to your heads instead, which cause sinus congestions, headaches, and SANS, which stands for spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome, where the fluid pressure flattens the back of your eyeballs and affects your vision as well. Another thing they had to go through was the tandem walk struggle, which is when, I don't know if you've seen, there was a lot of reels and TikToks about Christina Koch and a video of her struggling to walk like normal, which is demonstrating the tandem walk, which walks heel to toe. And after only 10 days in microgravity, the brain forgets how to use gravity for balance, which makes something that we do literally every day since birth so impossible to them, even though it was only a 10-day trip. And it required immediate physical therapy to get back into shape. And another thing would be muscle and bone maintenance. So even on the short 10-day trip, the bone density of these crew members began to drop severely, and so they had to use specialized flywheel exercise devices inside the cramped capsule to maintain muscle mass and bone strength. And then lastly, something else that happened during space for the crew was the fact that the microbiome shifted, and so researchers tracked the bacteria in the astronauts' gut, skin, and saliva, which Shanti will explain more about later.
Yes,
Serena, would you like to add on?
I'll talk more about their bones and also their brain. So when astronauts enter microgravity, their bones begin to change in ways that kind of resemble accelerated aging. So on Earth, bones constantly remodel themselves in response to weight and mechanical stress. So activities like walking or standing kind of signal the body to maintain their bone density, but in space that stress disappears, so bone building cells slow down while bone resorbing cells continue breaking the bones down, and this leads to a loss of minerals like calcium, particularly in weight-bearing areas such as the hip and the spine, and astronauts can lose around 1 to 2% of their bone mass per month, which increases the risks of fractures and kidney stones. And even after they return to Earth, the recovery can take months or years, and some bones may never fully recover again. So that's one of the things that they struggle with. And the brain also undergoes notable changes in space, largely due to fluid shifts caused by microgravity, because without gravity pulling fluids downward, more blood and fluid move towards the head, which increases pressure inside the skull, and this can alter the shape of the brain slightly, because it's linked to this condition known as spaceflight associated neurocular syndrome, which affects vision by flattening the back of the eyes, and swelling the optic nerve. And astronauts may also experience changes in balance and spatial orientation because the vestibular system, which relies on gravity, becomes less reliable. So then over time, the brain adapts, but this adaptation can cause disorientation when astronauts return to Earth's gravity, which is something else to be wary of. Shanti, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so another thing is that they have to go through a 2-week quarantine before, technically in the Artemis mission, they didn't go into the space station, but in, most other missions, when they go into the space station, they have to quarantine for at least 2 weeks, and for other missions as well, just because when, you're in a closed area in space, like the space station or the spaceship, viruses can transmit, there's, a higher chance that viruses will transmit because in the absence of gravity, when someone, coughs or sneezes, the viral particles don't actually settle on the ground like they would on Earth. And so that furthers the transmission of airborne viruses like COVID-19, for example. And also in space, when there's no gravity, bacteria and viruses mutate faster or adapt to become stronger. And that makes them more dangerous and stronger once infected. So when you go into space, it's super important that that the astronauts are quarantined so that you can be sure that they're not carrying any viruses, because once in space, that could be super dangerous for the crew. And then also something interesting that I wanted to add on was that for the Artemis mission, they specifically started this program called AVATAR, which stands for a Virtual Astronaut Tissue Analog Response. And what this was basically there were organ chips, which are very small. They're the size of a USB drive, and they're made with human cells that you can just take from a simple blood draw. And basically the cells mimic the tissue in a human's heart, liver, brain, or other organs, and they can be linked together to mimic entire systems like the blood circulatory system or other systems as well. And it's interesting because they're so small. It's the size of a USB drive. But basically what was unique about this for the Artemis mission is that they took samples from the crew who went on the spaceship, and then they put the samples aboard them in the spacecraft, and then when it came back down, the scientists took them out so that they can study the different elements in space and how that affects the body, having no gravity, for example. And specifically for the Artemis II mission, they took the bone marrow from the crew, or samples of the bone marrow from the crew. And this is important because bone marrow is responsible for producing red blood cells, white blood cells, and white blood cells, which makes it ideal for observing how a person's immune system reacts to diseases or treatments. And so basically they use the effects of space travel on the tissue to study how that could affect humans in the future. And that's super important because it helps us learn more about how we can be safer in the future for different if we want to fly further. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting to add on. I think that basically wraps up our episode. Thank you for listening. I'm Shanti.
I'm Serena.
I'm Ellen. Just a disclaimer, this podcast is 100% researched and made by high schoolers, so please don't take anything we say as 100% factual. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Thank you.